Tone Talks brings to you the racial wealth gap in America, explained in 60 seconds. In America, there are 190 million whites, living in just about 82 million homes, while there are 40 million blacks, living in just over 14 million homes. To truly understand the racial wealth gap, you must look past the income of these families and evaluate household worth. According to demos.org, in total, white American households own 90% of the national wealth. In contrast, black Americans altogether own less than 2.6% of the national wealth, with most of this small sliver being in the hands of black baby boomer retirees. Black working age families are largely invisible nationally in terms of wealth. To give a clearer lens, the bottom 50% of American households control only 1% of the national wealth. And of the total 14 million black households, likely over 10 million black families fall into this bottom group that owns nearly no wealth. The racial wealth gap is real and it's growing. While 10% or about 8 million white homes are worth $1.4 million or more, according to Slate.com, when you deduct the family car, 50% of African American homes, or over 7 million black families, are worth no more than $1,700. Subscribe to learn more at tonetalks.org.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second broadcast of the series. My name is Laureen Pryor, and I will serve as your moderator. This time, we're talking about the Black community, politics, and its impact on Black business. As you saw, we're going to incorporate the racial wealth gap and how that kind of impacts our access to capital. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to my guest. If you would, please welcome Miss Kula Koenig. Go ahead.
Hello.
That's right. Invite them to the party. Tell them who you are and where you're coming from, where you're representing from.
All right. I'm representing North Highlands Foothill Farms. That's right. Unincorporated Sac County. That's right. Kula Koenig. I'm the president of BWAPA Sacramento, Black Women Organized for Political Action. I'm also the founder of the Social Justice Politicore to crowdsource politics. And happy to be here, Lorraine.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming. I always enjoy our little powwows, and we're going to add to our party. We're going to welcome next Dr. Flo. Go ahead and introduce yourself, lady.
Hi, I'm Flo Kofer. I live in the neighborhood nobody knows about called Talek Village, which is basically just Stockton and Fruit Ridge. But they decide to, rename and rebrand themselves at some point, and nobody knows the name. And yeah, I'm just really glad to be here. I'm a non-native Sacramentan, but I rep hard for Sac. Been here about a decade, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming to my party. We're going to get it cracking in just a moment. But before we do, let's add the last ingredient to our volatile mix today. Let's welcome Miss Shannon.
Hi, everybody.
We got to give Shannon some props because Shannon came on and she came through with the lipstick today. So I just
come through lipstick,
for my public.
Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everybody, kind of where you're coming from.
I'm Shannon McKinley, and I am the chair of the California Capital Black Staff Association. I'm on the board of Black Youth Leadership Project. I work in politics, in policy, and I live in Sac County. I call it Rosemont adjacent. It's not really Rosemont.
Rosemont adjacent. Okay.
I'm from the Bay Area, born and raised.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I would love to welcome you ladies to the party today because we're going to get into some things that people don't really like to talk about unless they agree about it, right? Politics. Politics is a real divisive issue in our community. If somebody doesn't believe the way that you believe, sometimes that can cause hurt feelings and names start flying and, people get really, really crazy around politics. So before we get started, let me just say a couple of things. We don't all agree on everything. We won't all agree on everything, but there is a sisterhood that is not going to be broken just because we disagree on this issue or that one. Also, our comments are our own. We do not speak for any one group, any one person. We are complete individuals with full agency, And so what we talk about is our opinion and our opinion alone. So without further ado, let's jump into it, ladies. So we were talking about the racial wealth gap, and we know that there are historical implications. So Shannon, I'm gonna throw it to you. Can you kind of give us kind of just the broad spectrum of why the racial wealth gap is where it is today, and put that in context for us?
Oh, I think it starts out as, you know, in America, that a whole group of people were brought over here against their will and forced to give free labor for 400 years. You know, that's weaved into the American fabric. That is part of our history. And that's 400 years that Black people in this country are starting from behind. So all the systems that were built to keep that oppression and, you know, system of slavery in place have not been torn down. They continued after the Civil War with Jim Crow laws, and it was government sanctioned. If you look at housing, for example, which is a huge issue in California, housing is very expensive. But, you know, if The Color of Law, book by Richard Rothstein, you know, kind of breaks down how, you know, after World War II, when all these families and soldiers were getting help from the government, Black people were specifically locked out of these programs with government-backed mortgages, which helped lower the initial amount of money you needed to get in a house. Black people were forbidden by law from accessing that. They created zoning to keep Black people out of single-family homes. They had racial covenants that kept a white person who wanted to sell to a Black family from doing that. And in some cases, when they did it anyway, the Black family was forced out in court. So the state, the government has supported this system of racism, and Black people, no matter how many, you know, people who make it as a society, as a system, we still have a boot on our neck. And, you know, one person making it does not, you know, that water doesn't raise all our boats.
Right.
In addition to employment discrimination, in addition to all the barriers you have to want to start your own business, you know what I mean? Lack of access to capital, still discrimination in renting commercial properties, you know, lack of education about how to even get there, how to even start a business. So there's just been so many barriers in so many of the systems that we have to struggle through. Education system, you know, like I said, housing discrimination, healthcare, all of that is part of this government sanctioned discrimination and systemic racism that we have to fight through, that put us behind 400 years and keeps us behind now.
Yep.
Right. And so I see your head nodding. You want to add on to that?
Absolutely. I mean, everything that Shannon just said, and then thinking also about the way that networks work, right? So, you know, this is how institutional racism works. It says to you, these are the people you can be around. These are the places you can go to school. These are, you know, the ways that your life is structured. And then your networks, you know, there's a saying that your networks determine your net worth, which, you know, I'm not a big fan of capitalism, so that's probably going to come out a lot here. But the bottom line becomes that when you're in a position where you have to, you know, ask for, you know, loans to start your business, people to support your business, et cetera, you are tapping into a network that often has less money, right? Because of all the things that Shannon already laid out. So it impacts your ability to be able to do things, right? And so I think a lot about this story that Melody Hobson told, and she is with Ariel Investments, and she told this really interesting story about having the daughter of one of her investors interning with them at Ariel, and they were having a conversation about Black wealth gap. And Ariel is a Black-owned investment firm that's, I think, based out of Chicago. And they were having this conversation, and the woman, she's probably in her early 20s, and she said, "Wait, you loan money to your family and parents?" And all of the Black people in the room were like, "Yes, we have way more money than our parents, and of course we help them." I'm like, what else will we do? She was like, "I couldn't imagine the idea that my parents might be relying on me," right? And that is far too often the case for us, because, you know, for those who end up having some money, you're trying to support the people around you. And so it doesn't go as far either. There's not as much of it. And we already know about that, you know, the pay gap in terms of what we make. So even those who think they're making it often don't make as much as their white peers, and certainly not their white peers. So all those things kind of come together, the history of it. I mean, if we had been able to keep the money when we were sharecropping because we had gotten 40 acres and a mule, we wouldn't have had it sharecropped. And over generations, this money could have been built up. If redlining hadn't happened, we could have also gotten out of the service and been able to, you know, to purchase homes during that time between 1934 and 1968, right? Like all of those things would have built on themselves. And so those gaps, every time there was an opportunity for them to close, they didn't.
And they exacerbated those gaps, right? Because if you look at the book, The Color of Money, Black Bank said the racial wealth gap, we were trying to be self-sustaining. We were trying to build our neighborhoods. We were trying to invest our money, and it was taken from us. So
Tulsa,
right, exactly.
Rosewood.
It's one of them, right? There was there were
a bunch,
right.
When we were trying to be self-reliant, there were numerous massacres that happened. And so when people start to talk about the racial wealth gap in the context that Black people need to do more, we need more education, we need, you know, more, we need to support Black business more, we need more financial literacy. How do you get financial literacy without finances? Let's
exactly. Don't do that. I don't.
And how do you run a competitive business if you can't charge the lower prices because you need the money? Like that's the kind of stuff that I think we don't always get into.
Or the bank gave you a loan with a high ass interest rate because you were Black.
Exactly.
House business.
Yeah.
Right.
And so
because your business is in a Black neighborhood.
Okay. Shannon said something about Black neighborhoods, and you said what, Dr. Flo?
Well, I just said in some ways integration harmed that cohesiveness in addition to all the other factors, because it made it so that we didn't have to support our own businesses in the same way because they weren't our only option. And then capitalism, the market decides that whoever has the cheapest price, Walmart, ends up being where you buy your things, Amazon, right? And so, and because we have less money, it doesn't feel like as much of a luxury to be able to continue to support those businesses. Whereas when they were our only option, we kind of had to, but it wasn't, you know, there were all these other factors facing them.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, Kula, I want you to jump in because I think a lot of times when people start to think about the racial wealth gap in Black folks, they think that it's something that we're inherently doing wrong that caused us to be in this position. What exactly would you say to someone who asserted that?
That we're doing things wrong
to
be in this. I mean, I would say you need to, you know, kind of look at your history a little bit. I think education in terms of history and the historic discrimination that has happened, right? Like intentional, that continues to happen today. Once you start to actually like learn about that, then you actually get to you actually become more of an abolitionist and say, you know what, we need to take down this system, because even when Black people are trying, even when we were building wealth, it was taken away from us. Even in the 90s, when you've got like, you know, okay, fine, let's open up housing for African Americans, but then we were still getting these subprime mortgages, right? And so I think I would tell anybody that says that they really should, you know, kind of study their history. I mean, that's what I had to do, because, you know, I remember when people would talk about reparations, you know, years ago, I was kind of like, reparations, I don't know. And having a immigrant background, coming to the States when I was 8 years old, and just, you know, kind of not understanding all that. And once you start to study, then you're like, holy crap, yeah, there's been so much money that has been taken away from us. And that's why like white people are now worth what, like $100,000 and on average, and we have like $17,000, right? So in terms of our assets,
1,700.
I mean, even if you look at other, for example, like I think in Boston, they're worth like $8. Black folks, African Americans are worth like $8. When you go down to, I think it's Miami, it's $6, right? And so you're talking about having to sustain first of all, this is the richest country, right? We're having to sustain and live a life of poverty in a country that our ancestors built.
Literally.
Let's start there.
Yeah.
For free.
And then
for free.
Like we gave you this wealth. We gave you this wealth, right?
Yes.
Like our back, our sweat, everything. And then when we were trying to get ours, you took it back away, right? And then even when you had this facade of
and not just took it back away, took it with legislation.
Right.
You took
with policy. It was government sanctioned.
Yeah. And so I think people need to understand that these things don't just happen in a vacuum. Like this is what happened. And so when people start to talk about reparations and being repaid, understand that it is a debt owed. It is not a handout. Like we done already worked for it, run us our money, right?
Right.
And so I think that people need to start to frame the discussion in a different way. I see the comments, from multiple people talking about, I'm not giving them anything, blah, blah, blah. And you inherited some stuff from your forefathers who took it from our forefathers. So you need to run.
And Lorraine, I can just make a point. Like, it was so interesting. One of my colleagues that I worked with a while back, she said something to me about how, because she was on her second house, but she had another house that her parents had given her. And I was like, whoa, like,
nice.
it was so, I've never forgotten that, because I remember I was like, holy crap, that's
Must be
awesome.
nice.
Like, I don't even know what that looks like.
To get a house without a mortgage, then I can afford to invest.
Yeah.
What a concept.
Rent it out, right? And buy another.
And so, like, when we're talking about this stuff, I mean, I could tell, y'all probably could tell I'm getting hot under the collar. Shout out to my ADOS family out there that's working on actually advocating specifically and on our square for reparations. But I think that we have to understand the connection between civic engagement and getting the things that we need from these political people who are running for our votes, right? And I think that in order to get what we need, we have to be at the table and not simply on the menu.
Amen.
So,
Absolutely.
when talking about civic engagement, what do you think are some things that Black folks are missing on the engagement piece? And I'll throw it to Dr. Flo first, and then Kula, can you be back?
What are we missing on the civic engagement front?
Yes. I got some ideas, but I'm gonna let y'all answer first.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't even know if it's so much that we're missing. I think it's that, I think we're a highly engaged group given what we've been through, because there also is this, it would be a very righteous way to be able to, like, forget all y'all. We've done our due, and you fought us so hard not to be engaged, right? And so the idea that, we, especially seeing as how I'm talking to, 3 Black women, that we are one of the most, politically engaged groups in the country in terms of demographics. We also consistently, behave like grown-ups, which is a whole other conversation. But when it comes to making, like, sound political decisions. And so I think in terms of engagement, the thing where I won't say it's something we've done, but I would say that we have been left out of conversations. We have been deliberately fed misinformation. We have been, for example, those who, previously were incarcerated have been told we can't vote. We have been, fed this lie that our votes don't actually matter. We have been, told that voting is all that we need to do, right? And that seems to be the only time folks show up to engage us, right? And so I think there are a lot of things that play into that, because true engagement happens 365 days a year, and is a constant relation. It's a relationship. That's what engagement is. When we're talking about community engagement, we're talking about having a relationship with the community, having a relationship with an entity that's ongoing, that builds on itself, and where your opinions, your input, and the value you add is seen as important. And I think that that's a relationship that has never been established with it's always been again, you probably hear me say it more than once, a sort of capitalistic experience for us, which has been, what can we extract from you in value, not how can we actually be supportive and be partners with you.
Gotcha. Cooler.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question was I was thinking about breadcrumbs, right? Because what happened is you can be engaged, right? So you can come to the table, but then there's also, like, what are you willing to accept, right? What are you willing to say, like, okay, fine, this is good enough? Or what are you going to push back on and say, hell no, right? I don't want breadcrumbs, right? You cannot be spending all of this money on sheriff and then just going to give me, 10% or whatever. Like, I'm not accepting that. You can put forth proposals, but if they don't have any teeth and they just sound good and they're only going to help, a few people, then I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to come to your table and accept this so you can placate me, right? I'm not going to accept the divide and conquer. And so I think we can be consistently engaged, but then it's also like, what are you willing to accept and take from that table? And what are you willing to say, no, you need to give me more?
Yeah,
I demand that, right? And that's, I think, what we need to start asking for. We need to start making bold demands, right? That say, here's where I want funding to go, right? I want tuition-free education for Black folks so we don't come out in debt, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I want like an interest-free, mortgage or whatever, right? Like, let's start asking for those bold things, right? And not accept breadcrumbs and then be excited about it because the master decided he was going to give us a little something, something.
I hear you. Shannon, what do you think civic engagement wise? Because, we deal with the children.
Right.
We deal with the kids and we're trying to get them started earlier. So what would you say in terms of that civic engagement and the piece that you think we're missing out on?
Well, I think, I agree with Flo and Kula that, it's engagement 365 days a year. And I think some folks, when we don't kind of get what we want or we don't feel that our demands are being heard, we check out and we're like, we're just not going to vote.
Yeah.
That's a strategy that they want you not to vote. They want to disenfranchise you because if you don't vote and you're not engaged and you don't understand the process and you don't know when to engage, for example, when something's coming up in city council or in the legislature or at the county, when to leverage your power and your pressure, the pressure of the community, then you're never going to be at the table. And the table is our table. I'm not asking for a seat. I'm coming to my seat and you're going to listen to me. And that's where voting comes in, because if you don't, then I'm going to hold you accountable. People always talk about term limits and like for Congress and stuff. I'm like, we do have term limits. It's called an election. Incumbency is difficult. I get that. But at the end of the day, all these people are up for re-election at some point.
Right.
So that's why it's important for people to understand that you have to always engage. And I agree, engagement is a relationship, because your local officials, I'm gonna tell you, you can call, if you live in LA and you call my office, we will answer the phone. We will be nice to you. We will listen to you.
On your zip code.
But exactly, I will ask for your zip code, because if you don't live in my
district director here, I know how that works.
I'm not accountable to you.
Let's be honest.
Let's be real. Okay. If you don't live in the city of Sacramento, the mayor ain't worried about you. So I think it's important. Relationships come in different ways. I'm just saying.
And I just want to add, as we're talking about, you reminded me when you're talking about council and all that, like and economics. Tomorrow, the city council is actually going to be talking about the opening additional cannabis storefronts, right? Yep. In the city of Sacramento. And this has already been rife with inequities when you're talking about barriers to entry, when you're talking about, you got rich white men who are coming over here and they are actually the ones that are cultivating and opening up these businesses, right? When we have been jailed for it.
Right. Still being jailed.
Exactly. So that's another thing. It's like, okay, and one of the things that I'm trying to do is also let people know, like, there's this meeting tomorrow, and here's some of here's the background, here's some of the ways to call in and also have your voice be heard around this, because that's another way in terms of when you're talking about owning businesses, very, very profitable businesses, but then startup costs, right? How are you, what are the startup costs? Right. And then are you compensating, or are you kind of subsidizing it for those of us who have been prosecuted and weren't allowed to be involved in this in the first place?
Right. So
and it seems like it always happens that way, right? The thing that they decided to hold us punitively responsible for, I don't know if that's the right way to explain it, but the things that they hold us to our feet to the fire for, like, for instance, the war on drugs. When our folks was on drugs, they were like, oh my God, we need to put them in jail.
They're criminals. Lock them up.
Suppress them.
Now it's a health problem.
Listen,
now
talk about it.
The opiate craze, or what's the right word? Give me the right word.
Opioid crisis.
Yeah, that. Okay, the opioid crisis. Now they're finding compassion in a way to be compassionate and to offer help, to offer, something that
it's a disease
out of prison.
They need help.
Well, we've been saying that for forever. That drug use is a public health problem, but it's not a public health problem until it finds itself in white bodies.
Right.
So we have to be honest about that. And so I think what's missing on the civic engagement point, in some spaces. So I operate in the school board or the school districts. I rarely see us at the meeting, and probably because everybody else is at some other meeting, whether it be county or city council. But at the school board level, there's rarely Black people there, and our children are the ones who are disproportionately impacted by the decisions that are being made and by the criminalization on school campuses. And instead of being reactionary, we're rarely proactive, but we're very reactionary. We'll show up and we'll be pissed off for 5 minutes, and we'll stay there for 5 minutes, and then it'll die down, and everybody disperses.
And they go back to the work they were doing.
And it's like, how do we encourage folks to engage more consistently? I know everybody has, things that they're doing with their lives, and everybody is busy. But how do we encourage our folks to get more involved in the things that are happening? Because we know that they're happening, because they probably happened when we were in school, or when we were at some point affected by these decisions. So how do you think we get more folks involved politically? Let's talk about it.
Can I talk about structure? And then I think Kula probably could jump in here with, what she's been mobilizing. So when it comes to structure, one of the things that, I've been really trying to work hard on is, how does the city actually engage its folks? And I haven't gotten to the county yet, because the city has been such a huge undertaking. But one of the things we've been looking at is, I asked the question, if somebody moved here today, fresh to Sacramento, and wanted to know what has been going on in their city for the last 6 months, could they reasonably find out? And what I mean by reasonable is saying 2 hours of their time to find that out. The answer to that is no, because the only thing you have are the unannotated minutes from each meeting, and you have to go in and click on each one and find those minutes, and they're only posted after the next meeting when they're approved. So you don't have a way of going in and getting a summary of what legislation has passed in the last 6 months. And if you were new here and you said, okay, I can't go backwards, what's coming down the pipeline? That information does not exist publicly. So part of the issue with engagement, and part of the reason why it feels like we show up and we're angry about stuff, is because there's not a free flow of information the way there is at the state. At the state, when everybody decides to put forward legislation in the beginning, now granted, gut and amends aside, we get a chance to be able to look over everything that was proposed and say, okay, here's
there's a calendar. There's a
calendar. And then you say, okay, it's been referred to Assembly Health. Cool. This is an Assembly bill. I'm going to check it out there. And then I'm going to check it out when it goes to appropriations. And then I know it's going to the floor, and all those things are noticed.
And you can sign up for alerts. You can track a bill.
Exactly. At the city, you get none of that. What you end up
getting, you get none of that.
Every Thursday, in a very trauma, not informed way, we find out how our city is irrevocably going to be changed the next Tuesday. And we have 5 days to mobilize a bunch of people and to get out there. It doesn't necessarily have to go to committees. Those committees are entirely optional. It could be an emergency meeting, like our entire 911 response and police reform was on July 1st, where the agenda isn't even posted until 24 hours in advance. And literally, I had news organizations calling me up because I told people it was happening, because I got an inside tip, and they were asking me, how do you know? I want to talk about this, but I have nowhere to go for information. So that's part of the problem. Yeah. That's part of the reason why it feels the way you're saying, Lorene, is because there's not a way to be able to be engaged in an ongoing way, because you don't know what's in the pipeline until it shows up publicly. And so we have to change that if we actually want to have real engagement. And then I think, Shannon and Kula can talk about the other ways that we can engage even within the structure. But I want to call out the structure, because it's really messed up, and it just doesn't make sense. And it's not even good compared to the state structure, which we all look at and live under.
Right.
Gotcha.
No, and I've certainly proposed, and even in that conversation in meetings with Supervisor Patrick Kennedy and others, to say, hey, why aren't the meetings, county meetings, why aren't they in the evenings, right? Why is it at freaking 9:30 a.m., right? And then also in terms of the budget, why aren't we clear around the budget cycles and what's happening? I've talked to chiefs of staff and all of that, right? So all of that with flow, absolutely, I think we need to kind of look at that structure. While in the meantime, knowing that we have that structure, some of the work that I've been doing is around getting folks to look at the agendas when they come out. Yes, it'll be Thursday. We're looking at the agenda, and then actually setting up events or reaching out to folks, whether it's text alert or email or whatever, say, hey, this meeting is happening. Here's a few agenda items that are important in terms of social justice. Here's some talking points. So for the meeting on Tuesday, there's an event on Facebook that I created. It's a watch party, just so folks can all come on with talking points and they can go in the comments and be engaged. Also, we publish something twice a month that tries to recap the social justice happenings in Sacramento with the big meetings and things that happen, again, to keep people, abreast of what's going on, right? So trying
and
to
that's super helpful.
That's needed. That's needed.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's super helpful because, I pay attention to what's going on at the state level a lot, but a lot of the local stuff is lost on me. So I signed up for your newsletter, Kula, and I was like fascinated. I'm like, my intergovernment nerd was like, yes, but I wouldn't have known had I not read it. So I think tools like that are super valuable.
Yeah, we're also coming up with training videos, how to make a public comment, how to read an agenda, what does consent, like a glossary of terms, what does consent mean, what's a dais, things that we take for granted, because we're kind of in this world.
Okay.
Oh, that's your mom, girl.
She got that tested.
Go ahead, Cora.
I was like, what's happening?
So the glossary of terms, go.
Yeah. So anyways, again, to keep people engaged and make it easy for folks, again, to kind of think about a glossary of terms and also training videos. And then some of the things that we even have is like a little snippet of who are the power players in Sac County government, Sac City government, how does it even work? So short little videos that we're also building, again, to have a civically engaged and educated base for social justice. And later on, coming up with a report card on where local officials stand on social justice issues. Coming back.
Yeah, she's coming back. She's coming back.
Sorry,
have a whole side conversation. It's all good. So we're going to keep it moving. So as folks are watching, if you have any type of questions, you have any comments, please make sure you type them into either YouTube or Facebook, and we will get to them. So I want to move on because, we're in election season. Black people are not a monolith, and we're not going to agree on everything. So let's go over a couple things. So what propositions are raising red flags for you guys? Let's start there.
Raising red flags are just important to mention. It ain't no red flags, but Prop 16 is definitely on my mind, spirit, and heart. And I want to make sure we do right, and the ghost of Ward Connerly can finally be put to death.
Girl,
right.
Wait, is he dead?
I mean, he's still alive. He's still alive, but his bill should not be.
Yeah. We need to end that madness right now.
Yeah.
Yes on 16.
So everybody's a thumb up, and here go. Where are you going, girl? All right.
I started a trend. My bad.
I was like, sure. It felt like she was going to get maybe something to plug in.
Oh,
okay.
Oh, this is crazy how much money they spent on this 22. It's a whole booklet. This is Prop 22.
Okay, so we definitely got to talk about 22.
So are we going? So we're going to Prop 22 right now.
Let's go to Prop 22.
Okay.
You're like surprised that tech people have money, Kula.
It's just, I'm not surprised that they do, but it's just like, oh my God, you're spending so much money to not have to pay people.
Most expensive prop in California history.
You said $100 million?
$180
million. It's the most expensive proposition in California history.
Okay.
Wow.
So are you what are y'all thinking on Prop 22? What's the
Hell no.
I'm kind of leaning yes.
Hell no.
I'm leaning yes.
Shannon is leaning yes. So let's start with Shannon. Why yes? Talk to us about
let me go back. So, and I'm not a shill for I like my Lyft rides. I've never been in an Uber, but I think it goes back to, and again, this is on behalf of myself, not my employer. Let me keep that super real. I just think that the way that AB5 was done.
So AB5 precipitated.
That predated, that's why this is on the ballot.
Okay.
And so I think that the opportunity to leverage that bill with getting a system that worked better for drivers, that kind of created something new instead of trying to force it. So AB5 codified a court decision, Dynamex, that was brought about by a company who one day took their employees and just automatically made them independent contractors. So it's kind of putting parameters on and trying to get at misclassifications by creating a stricter framework for who's considered a independent contractor and who's considered an employee. So when the bill was going through the legislature, there were a number of exemptions. So like doctors, lawyers, some of those more kind of white collar jobs. And there was recent legislation that dealt with freelance writers and some other musicians and folks who were caught up in basically their livelihoods threatened by this bill. So it was a complicated issue. But I think with the gig workers and specifically kind of the rideshare folks, you know, I think there was an opportunity there to kind of leverage that and bring them to the table and create something that worked better for the workers, the drivers, that could maintain some kind of system where you kind of keep that ability to be flexible and not bring them under total control of the company as an employee, because that takes away their opportunity to drive for multiple companies or, you know, kind of do it based on their own schedule. So kind of maintain some of the things that are good about it and that the reason people drive for it, but also getting at some of the wage issues and the compensation issues, the health issues and that. And they didn't do that. So I think that's where this came from. And of course, letting the corporation decide what they're going to do for the drivers is never a good idea. But I feel like I'm concerned about the people who will lose opportunities, because the assumption is that they'll just comply and they're not going to shut down or completely change how it works and nobody's going to lose an opportunity. And I don't believe that. So I have concerns. I think we were talking about this before, like the super duper threshold, I think sets a bad precedent for the legislature. But also I get it because there's 2/3 Dems right now and they're probably concerned that it'll just get overturned. So my concern is about the loss of the opportunity. And because of the way AB 5 was written, people are going to lose jobs and lose opportunities. I mean, you may eventually get somewhere where it's an employee system and it may be more like the cab system, which, you know, not necessarily the best, but that's my concern, is that people are going to lose opportunities that otherwise would have existed had the legislature frankly done a better job with that bill.
Okay. And before you answer that, I want to remind everybody we're talking about Prop 22. That is the app-based driver proposition, right? Prop 22. So Shannon is leaning towards yes, and you guys are leaning towards no. So can you tell us?
Oh no, we're hard. I'm a hard.
We're hard nose.
I'm a hard.
I'm a hell no.
Okay.
They're a hell no.
Okay, got it. So
Go, convince me.
So I'm a hell no in part because I think the 7/8 part, it's only taking a 2/3 vote to overturn the ban on
affirmative action. Explain that for the non-policy folks, please. I just want to.
And I will. So what that means is that you have to get 35 votes in the Senate and 70 votes in the Assembly in order to make any changes or overturn this. Yeah, and so I have two issues with this, right? One is the governance issue of, I don't think the threshold should be higher for Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and whoever the rest of their friends are who are in cahoots on this to be able to write their own employee labor laws and then tell the people we elected to actually do this work that they basically all have to agree to make any changes to it. I have never in my time doing policy work seen a bill that doesn't need changes. And part of the reason they're bringing this referendum is because the original bill possibly needed some changes. And so to tie our hands to be stuck with what they come up with, I think is completely asinine. Okay. So the 7/8 clause does bother me. I get from Shannon's perspective, like why they maybe did that because of how, steeped it. But like, let's be honest here. We really have 3 parties in California and we don't acknowledge them because the progressive wing and the moderate wing of the Democratic Party are not the same. And then you have some Republicans. So it's not as if we have the super majority of people who all agree, just like Black people aren't a monolith. Neither is the legislature.
Neither are the Democrats.
And neither are exactly. So so that one gives me pause.
Neither are the progressive Democrats.
Right. Also that. So it gives me pause that they are setting a threshold that was higher than the threshold for things like affirmative action, which we've had a ban on for 24 years. That just seems like a problem to me. Especially because there may be some things we want to tweak, and the only way we'll be able to do that is to get all those people to agree. The second part,
that's never going to happen.
Exactly. The second part that's really, really concerning is that they framed this issue as our only options are either to make them employees or to keep the status right now. And not only is that a false dichotomy, but it ignores the practical reality that there is a way to make these drivers independent, which is what they say they want and what the drivers say they want. So the example I like to use both Yelp and Orbitz or Expedia. In both instances, these are companies that are bringing together businesses, dare we say, maybe even independent contractors who run their own businesses, who set their own prices, who determine their own hours, and who have ultimate control over their businesses. And you don't see, folks getting into it with them about does Yelp own McDonald's? McDonald's is on their
platform. Set your own price.
It's very clear that Yelp does not own McDonald's. It's very clear that Orbitz does not own Delta and United, because the relationship they've set up is one where these companies come and they advertise their services, and you pay a fee to be on the platform, and then you pay a fee to whenever you book somebody through the platform. Right. Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and everyone else could set the exact same thing up. The reason they won't is because they feel they'll make less money. So what they're doing right now is they are calling them independent contractors, treating them like employees, and then not offering employee benefits. And they have an option to actually make them independent. They don't want to take that option. So they want to convince all of us that the only option is what we're doing right now, or making them employees where they get underpaid because of the nature of their business. And that's simply not true. And so for the disingenuous way that they framed this argument, I also think they deserve to get a no on this. I think they should be brought back to the table. But the other thing that doesn't concern me as much is that California is the 5th largest economy in the world. If you want to pack your bags and go home, trust and believe there are lots of smart people who will be willing to fill in that void in the state of California and make sure that there is a rideshare platform here with all these drivers. Trust and believe, because I'll promise you this, if they leave, I'll do it. I'll start a new platform if they were, because
make that money, black wealth. Make that wealth.
To count their money.
No,
I'm not stupid to count my money. Okay,
I got
that black wealth.
Because everywhere they've left, like places in Texas and whatever else, have actually come up with more humane models to be able to do this. And so I'm actually heartened by when they've pulled out, because I almost want to say, you promise you're gonna leave, please.
And how many times have I've been in like a Lyft, because I also own Uber, but where the driver will be like, hey, are you in town for a while? You want me to just drive you around? Here's my number. Don't use the app. You know what I'm saying? Because I want to get that fund. So that happens, right? But also, I just want to add, we're talking about things being transactional and money and all that. I also want to be clear. You may have seen that the NAACP, the state NAACP, is supporting Proposition 22, this proposition. And so we just want to be clear that when the state NAACP makes decisions, it's not necessarily in the interest of Black people. It's also in the interest of Alice Huffman and how much money she's going to get for her consulting firm. And so I just want to be very clear about that. So when you're looking at Prop 23, Prop 22, Prop 23, Prop 24, basically do the opposite of what the state NAACP said. I just want to say that.
And she has taken the side of Big Pharma. She's taken the side of Big Tobacco. She is known for taking the side of whoever's willing to pay her to run these propositions. And she, of course, gets to put on the proposition
to build her own black wealth.
NAACP president, because that's factually true. And because she doesn't take those until the NAACP takes their position on it. But somehow the NAACP always ends up on a really perplexing side of these issues, given who the NAACP's supposed interests are. So
it can make sense, as Flo would say.
I'm confused. Well, make it make sense. I'm confused.
All right. So that's a yes for Shannon and a no for you all.
I'm still thinking. I listened to my sisters. Flo and Kula made some good points.
Okay. So you're gonna take them back to the jury room to deliberate.
I'm a think.
Okay.
I'm a thinker.
Yes, she is.
And I get it. I do think AB5 needs some changes, and I think that and all of that. And I want us to be able to do that. And what I'm concerned is that passing this makes it so that there won't be any change, at least not for the Lyft and Uber and DoorDash folks. Right. And we'll only be left having to be able to clean this up for the folks who didn't end up in their elite party of setting out what the labor laws are going to be by paying $180 million for it. So I hope y'all know.
Yeah,
bring them back to the table. Let's do it. Let's let folks like Shannon, who actually can think this through, come up with some better policy than what these folks came up with.
I agree. Shannon for president.
Because Shannon is smart.
Legislature. I'm just a staffer. So
please, chief of staff.
Staffers
She's already like, I'm like, did you define the words for the people, please, Mrs. McKinley?
Right. Staffers are where the work happens, and anybody who tells you otherwise is a lying fool.
Right. So if anyone who's watching right now, if you have a question on one of the propositions, if you're confused about something, if you want some more arguments on one side or the other, if you could go ahead and type those into the chats, we will take care of that. It says
can somebody put in the voter guide link
Yes.
also? Because we have all of that in there too. Flo, I would just say real quick, another proposition that has been on my mind, and just because it shocked me as I was reading about it, it's Proposition 24. That's the quote unquote privacy one. It lies. Candy will tell you lies, the lies, the lies.
It's funded billionaire.
The lies. So basically what Prop 24 is trying to say is that, okay, you're going to get increased, privacy and control of your data, when you go on the website.
Lies. If there's no,
you go on the website, you control all
to it.
Tracking you. Anyway, the reason why it is a lie, it is because what's actually going to happen is you're going to have to pay to actually not have to share your data with those companies, right? So it's going to be a pay to play scheme or to protect your privacy, right? So that's going to happen. And then also what they did is they're taking consumer privacy protection away from the Department of Justice and putting it into a separate commission, right? That who knows who they're going to appoint on that commission. The budget for that commission is only $5 million when we have about 40 million people here and so many tech companies, right? So basically that commission is just going to let tech companies run roughshod. But more importantly, too, if you see who's actually funded the campaign, it's a guy who did like a dating app and this real estate guru.
One millionaire.
Exactly. It's just one person, right? And again, Alice Huffman is supporting it. So there you go. Vote no.
Right. And the fact that there aren't any tech companies opposed to it, that's a huge red flag.
Right.
Because they're getting what they want. They're like, oh, really?
Like, actually, that was the main point. I'm thinking about it. Why would, you're reading it, you're like, why aren't any tech companies opposing this bill that's supposed to be giving
they're getting what they want.
Privacy? Yeah. Because they're going to get what they want.
And the legislature actually just passed a privacy bill that literally just took effect. So we got to make, like, going back to what Flo said, it's right. It's better to leave this in the hands of the legislature. And I also think that bill has some like super crazy threshold in it. So you can't change it. So, again, the legislature is trying to do this privacy work, but this same person who tried a ballot measure last cycle, and that's what kind of got CCPA pushed through, is the same person who's funding this. So vote no on that, because it's
one
shady.
Person.
One billionaire. Right. Trying to decide tech policy in California.
Yep. Okay. And then just really quickly before we move on to the local measures, really quick, what are you guys thinking about Prop 25?
Oh, 25. Okay. I was going to say 23.
I was going to have you talk about 20. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, what was 23?
23 is the dialysis centers. And I just felt like as 4 Black women, we probably should, chat about that one.
Okay. Sorry. Let's go there.
So this is another one that the NAACP has tried to kill now twice. The first time was in 2018, and it was so there is something called a medical loss ratio. It's basically saying that 80% of your health insurance premium has to be spent on actual health services. And if it's not, then you get a refund. And so that very first year after the Affordable Care Act passed, some people actually got a refund in the mail because their insurance companies weren't doing that. Well, unfortunately, dialysis is carved out of the medical loss ratio. So while all of your other services are considered, it is not. And so DaVita and Fresenius are the 2 really big dialysis companies, and they make a lot of money because they don't have a cap on the amount of revenue they're allowed to make. And one of the ways that they kind of get around this is because the regulations around them are so different from other health services. So they are allowed to have, techs that, provide the services. They don't have to be licensed medical professionals, nurses, or physicians. And so it's really caused challenges because, people who experience dialysis are people who have end-stage renal disease. These are people who are pretty sick, often have diabetes or other cardiovascular diseases that cause their kidneys to no longer function. And they have to go in 3 to 4 times a week to be able to have their blood clean, doing the job that their kidneys would do in order to stay alive. So these dialysis centers need to be close to people's homes and accessible because this is a procedure that takes, at least a couple of hours for many people to do, and they have to do it multiple times a week. And so rightly so, these people who are obviously very sick want these places to stay open. And so every time some legislation comes along, Davida and Fresenius say, if you pass this, we're going to have to shut down. But instead, what they're doing right now is, if you get sick while you're there, they don't have the appropriate medical staff on site to be able to deal with things like infections or whatever else. So they call 911. And then an ambulance comes and picks you up, and you're stuck with the ambulance cost and the inpatient hospital visit, instead of being able to handle what should be routine because you have end-stage renal disease. They know you weren't that healthy in the first place. And so what this bill is trying to do is it's requiring either a nurse or a physician to be on site. And that's because we have a physician shortage. So either will do.
That sounds really reasonable to me, Flo.
Feels very reasonable to me too. It requires that they have to report to the Department of Public Health if there are infections that happen on site, so that we can track them and figure out what maybe the challenges are and how you can improve quality of care, which again sounds pretty reasonable in terms of the things you should report. And then it also makes it so that they can't close down dialysis centers without first checking with the Department of Public Health and making sure there's a plan in place to be able to provide services to those communities. So this is another one where the commercials are lying to people and saying, if this passes, the centers will shut down. And I'm like, literally, one of the provisions is that they won't be able to just pack up and go home. So if you're concerned about a continuity of care, this is a bill to pass. If you're concerned about having high quality care, this is a bill to pass.
Yes, on 23.
Yes, on 23. And it's unfortunate because the people who are doing yes don't have a whole lot of money. So it's mostly all these folks lining up to say no. And so you're seeing constant commercials about this that are spreading a lot of really disingenuous misinformation. Not even just like, that's our side and our opinion, but like, this will make us shut down. And it's like, you won't be allowed to actually. So no, that's not true.
All right, so look, we're winding down. This is going too quick for me.
Are we winding down?
Is it almost 7 already?
We got like 9 minutes to go, or 8 minutes, y'all.
All right.
So let's quickly.
We got lightning round. Sorry.
Y'all have some stuff in Sacramento. I don't live in Sacramento, so I can't vote in Sacramento for your local measures. So I'm hearing that there
Hell no on Measure A. Hell yes on Measure C. That's it.
Okay.
So C, yes.
Mm-hmm.
C, yes.
Why no on A? Why no?
Because we need actually we want strong communities, not a strong mayor who's going to be able to decide line item vetoes, hire and fire the city manager, and doesn't have to sit in city council meetings. No, we actually want our council members to have power because we elected them, and we don't want their power to be diluted because now there's a strong mayor who gets to decide everything. And we've got Katie Valenzuela coming in, a woman of color, and possibly another woman of color coming in with my bang. And then it's like, well, we don't did all that work to elect them, and then you're gonna have strong mayor come in and take away their power and all the work of their constituents that they did. That's not cool. Let's focus on making our community stronger and to be engaged versus having the mayor be able to, have all the power and set the budgets, right? And so if you're not on his good side, then you're just ass out, right? That's not what we want. So,
yeah,
That's
a big one.
That's it.
Right in the middle of an election, we're changing the rules. So literally, Katie was elected to have a certain job, and then her job potentially could change in November before she gets sworn in December.
That's crazy.
That just makes no sense. And it feels a lot like just taking the ball and going home because
you can't get your way.
Demographics and the political nature of the body is changing.
Right. Because they would be more progressive, and they would he hasn't supported any of them, right? So he obviously supported Steve Hansen, and he's support Les Simmons. And so he's not supporting those other folks because he feels like they're not going to be there to, kind of give him the alley-oop to what he wants to do, right? They're gonna fight him on it, but that's what we want. We elect people. We want discourse. We don't want yes people on the council, right? So, and he's held disrespectful because he tied Measure A to some equity measures that aren't even binding. That he basically met with Black women and asked us our opinion, and then took our ideas that weren't even fully formed yet and put it in Measure A without even telling us that he was doing Measure A. So he used us.
Listen, it's even worse than that because the first draft of this said, due to the death of George Floyd. First of all, okay. First of all, and thankfully, I think it might have been Angelique Ashby who said, "I think you need to revise this intro." But the first draft was basically like this was his reckoning with how racist the country is and how we need a new day in Sacramento. First of all, that's a bold-faced lie because you
done got thirsty.
you definitely like first and foremost you polled on this last year and it polled as terribly as it has the last couple of times. It failed when it was brought up before the city, whether to council or to the people. So that's first things. But then all of the equity proposals that Kula just mentioned, when they were added in, suddenly he could get himself over the 50% threshold for polling. So that's the direction he went. And so when we all came to him and said, look, you need to take the equity proposals out. We had several hundred people sign up and say, look, we'll make a decision on strong mayor and we'll make a decision on the equity proposals, but they don't need to be strange.
Don't hold them hostage.
Don't hold them hostage. Right. And he decided no, because the only way he could possibly even remotely think about getting strong mayor is if it was tied to this stuff that is far more popular. Some of which were fully fleshed out proposals like participatory budgeting. Which came from the Measure U committee. And then other ones were ideas that need more, that first of all need teeth. Like we'll do an equity analysis and then
we had 3 meetings when we talked about it. And next thing we know, they're in a measure. And he didn't even tell us. Disrespectful AF.
Don't have an ethics commission and have them present official findings to the council, and then you find out you're acting unethically, and it's like, well, that was fun, guys. Let's all go home. Like, no, you have to act on these. Like, there needs to be some sort of recourse for being unethical, for not engaging in equity practices. Like, that shouldn't just be something that comes along. And then the $40 million, which is supposed to be the promise of Measure U, actually, it doesn't involve any new spending. So they'll be able to take the current youth parks and community enrichment budget is more than $10 million. So they'll be able to say, yep, we spent $10 million on youth. And then the rest of it is inclusive economic development, but they don't have a definition for that. And I have heard the mayor and seen him write on his own blog about how youth pop-ups is economic development. So by that definition, anything he does that he considers to be something about the community, he'll count as inclusive economic development, and there won't actually be new dollars. There's a way to do this. It's not this way.
Okay. And so when you say economic development, flesh that out for me. So you're saying building things, or is that what?
My definition of economic development is very clear. His definition doesn't exist, but my definition is investments in the community that yield jobs that then contribute to the tax base that come back to the city, right? So if we help a business get started, then when they are, bringing in profit, they pay taxes on that from sales tax revenue and use tax and Measure U and all the ways in which they're going to pay property taxes. All of those things are going to come back to the city. Or you're investing in an economy like construction, where we need more people to be able to work those jobs. And so you're doing job training, whatever else, so that, again, those people then yield salaries and pay property taxes back to this and use taxes and sales taxes back to the city. That's economic development.
You're supporting Black businesses, right? You're targeting that in terms of the capital that is afforded, the opportunities that is afforded, right? And from what I've seen in that process, it's actually been some white folks co-opting Black people ideas and then presenting it, right, for inclusive economic development.
Right.
So he's on brand for America.
There's not all the research that my organization did in partnership with Public Health Advocates and California Urban Partnership and Youth Forward and UC Davis Center for Regional Change. We did some research looking at who was harmed by the war on drugs and then who made all the money back after marijuana has been legalized. In the city of Sacramento, there's not a single Black-owned cannabis operator. And during this time seriously. And
Watch
during
the city council meeting tomorrow. Watch the city council meeting tomorrow at 5:00.
Yeah.
Equity.
During the time when it was illegal, Black people in Sacramento had the highest disparity in arrests for marijuana, even though Black and white and Latino and Asian, and we all use marijuana at about the same rate. But Black people in the city of Sacramento were 29 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana. Yet, even though law enforcement soundly said they did not want 64 to pass. They are the largest beneficiary of those tax revenues. Most of the money goes into their budget, and the cannabis programs, the core programs, have gotten some money in the city of Sacramento, but we still don't have any actually licensed operators in effect. So when you talk about restorative justice and doing right by a community that was harmed unnecessarily and over-policed and all of that during the time when marijuana was illegal, that's a real travesty. And so that all has happened. I mean, it passed in 2016 at the same time that, Mayor Steinberg was elected. And so all of these things have happened under the watch of this current council. And they haven't gotten it right. And we've constantly had to push them. And so then to come along and say, you're the equity champion and we should trust you is really challenging from a policy perspective, right? It's like, we're not trying to be out here, having a personal attack. It's like, we're just laying out, this is what happened. These are the facts. And so if you happen to be in charge of the set of circumstances that led to those facts, you are culpable and you are responsible.
Accountability.
I hear you. And I think that we need to hold folks accountable.
Absolutely.
We need to know what's going on. We need to engage, like you said, build relationships, because again, if we're not engaging, we can't fight for the resources for the Black businesses to really be able to really grab a root. Because sometimes, you can do a little bit here and there and they can get started, but the sustaining that business becomes a challenge. And
right.
So,
and it's resources other communities get.
Yeah. Well, then, yeah. Yep. You're right.
Right.
You're right. You're right.
So,
So we need to fight for the resources. We need to fight for the resources. So,
So that's a no on A for us.
That's
yes, ma'am.
And a yes on C. Yes on C in terms of rent stabilization, making sure that, landlords can't just be jacking the prices, can't be evicting you, and there's a local elected rent board, locally democratically elected rent board, local board to arbitrate disputes and stuff. So really, really important.
And so y'all like Measure C.
Yes, Measure C. Measure C is actually, and this is another equity issue, right?
On C.
So
no.
So the advocates collected 44,000 signatures to get C on our ballot, and it qualified in 2018. Our mayor and city council fought and actually took those advocates to court to keep this off the ballot. That's why it was a late addition. That's why it's Measure C and not Measure A, because it's the first one that qualified. But they fought to keep it off of our March primary ballot. They then sued the advocates to keep it off of our August ballot, and a court came in after our deadline, which was August 7th, to put things on the ballot. They came in a few days later and said, you have to put it on the ballot. So the city had to scramble to put it on the ballot. So
when you see that mailer with all the city council on there saying that they don't support this, it's because you can see who's paid for by the apartment association, okay? So because they want to keep your rents raised. So look at who paid for that mofo.
And also consider the fact that all 9 members of the mayor and city council are all homeowners. And there's nothing against owning your home, but it takes a pretty, it's pretty gutsy for people who own their homes, and several of whom are landowner or are landlords, to then come in and say that they don't want to protect the people in Sacramento who have seen some of the highest rent hikes in the last several years in the nation. Not just in California, but nationwide, Sacramento has seen the cost of living go up dramatically, and it's costing people their homes. And so you can't care about homelessness if you're not thinking about the pipeline of homelessness, which is people no longer be able to afford the place that is stably housing them right now.
Gotcha. Woo, we don't.
And Black women in particular are the most likely to be overburdened by housing, which is spending more than 50% of our income on housing. So this is also a racial justice issue. We are overrepresented in homelessness, and we're overrepresented in people who are being burdened, circling back to our original conversation about wealth gaps. You can't save if you have to spend over half your money every month just to stay housed. And that's a big issue. And so the cost of housing is something that we should be voting on in support of, in particular, Black communities and Black women, especially.
And when you said that, it made me think of something. So they like to talk about this spending power that the Black community has. If we're spending 50% of our monies on rent and living expenses, do we really have the spending power that they like to tell us we do? Or are they talking about because we are consumer based and we don't own anything? Like, I just got questions. So listen, we done ran out of time. We are over the hour. I am so sorry. We have to shut it down, but I do thank y'all for coming on and hanging out.
Count on me to pick. Friendship that'll never end.
We're gonna sing, but we're gonna get out of here.
All right, bye, y'all.
Bye, guys.
See you guys. Podcast is November something. I don't know what it is. November
What?
Not y'all. I mean,
Oh.
let me get y'all off. Hold up. Okay, so our next broadcast is on November, I believe, is 17th. I'm looking for Black businesses who want to come on and talk about their experience as being business owners in Sacramento and what we can do to make to help to make their businesses thrive in the age of COVID. So join me next time. I believe it's November 17th. If it's not, just check BSBA's website or page, and the information should be up for you. So thank you guys for joining me tonight, and I'll see you next time.